I will be reading 1 Corinthians 9:24 through 27. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wealth, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others I myself should be disqualified.
And the church said, Amen. Please be seated. Good job, Mike. Well, we've been working through Galatians, and when we came to chapter 5, we've kind of landed for a little bit to work through the various fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and we wrap it up, that part of our study, with self-control. And when we think about self-control, or the topic of self-discipline, what's usually the subject? Right? Food, maybe money. Realize that some of you may be new to Union Hill, so you may not realize that I've written 2 best-selling books on the subject. Actually, I've written the cover for 2 best-selling books that could become best-selling books if I actually wrote the book. But I know a lot about the subject. In fact, I'm going to give you really some very helpful hints to sum up all your areas of need. First of all, in the area of food. It is guaranteed, this process is guaranteed, that you will lose weight and it will not cost you anything. In fact, you'll save money from it. And here it is, eat less. Yeah, and then the second volume comes with it that's guaranteed that you will have more money and you'll end up actually probably losing weight too with this principle. Spend less. And I know some of you thinking right now, this guy is good, right? Now, I mean, all I got to do is write the rest. It will be, I'm sure, revolutionary. Well, okay, we all realize that, that's easier said than done, isn't it? How do we put this into practice? Self-control. Why is it so difficult and challenging? Since the ancient of days, people have been trying to figure out how to master self. For example, the Greek philosopher Socrates considered self-control a foundational virtue that all the others are built upon. One of his students, Xenophon, wrote this about his teacher's philosophy: "Shall not every man hold self-control to be the foundation of all virtue, and first lay this foundation firmly in his soul? For who without this can learn any good or practice it worthily?" Because Greeks valued self-control and self-discipline, they held highly then the athletes who demonstrated such self-discipline in their life. And Paul also looks to them in a way of analogy on the subject. He writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 25, "Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air." Boxing was one of the Olympic events. "I discipline my body. I keep it under control." So Paul also references athletes and their remarkable self-discipline to be the top, right, of their events that they compete in. But isn't it amazing how someone can show such remarkable self-discipline in one area of their life and yet in another fail miserably? Take, for example, right now, NFL sporting camps or training camps getting up to speed, and people are talking about who are the latest athletes who will not, right, be eligible this year because of some major mistake. Their addiction they couldn't let go of, the drugs they couldn't, right, not turn to, the temper they could not control. How many politicians or movie stars or others that people would consider, right, heroic today have failed in another area of their life? It'd be easier just to keep it at earthly stars. But what about heavenly stars? What about people who seem to show great discipline in their spiritual life, their Bible study, their church attendance, their service? Elders who left their wife, preachers who embezzled, Bible class teachers who succumbed to an addiction. Why is it so hard to shore up security and strength in all of the wall that surrounds our life? Before listing the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, he says this back in verse 17. The desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other to keep you from doing the things you want to do. So there's this spiritual warfare at stake. And even the great Paul expresses this frustration in Romans 7:15. I do not understand my actions. I do not do what I want to do, and I do the things I hate. Verse 18, I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. Wretched man I am. Verse 24. Who will deliver me from this body of death? Perhaps that's how you feel, in an area of your life that just seems to have control over you, and the wretchedness, the guilt, the shame that comes each time that the enemy comes in through that point of weakness. Of course, Paul doesn't stop here. He completes this thought in verse 25. Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. Then in God we find the ability to shore up those areas where our limitations end. God then begins. After he makes the comments about the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, he says this in verse 24, those who belong to Jesus Christ have crucified the flesh, its passion, and its desires. So, one of the important steps of self-control is remembering it's really about self-sacrifice, sacrificing ourselves, giving ourselves fully over to God, dying to Christ. I've been crucified with Christ, as Paul said earlier in Galatians. That I no longer live, that life I lived in the flesh, I now live by faith in the Son of God. There's a poem that captures the thought well. Two natures beat within my breast. The one is foul, the one is blessed. The one I love, the one I hate, the one I feed will dominate. Which nature are you feeding? The sinful nature or the selfish nature? What I'd like to do now is to offer you some practical lessons that experts have said can help us to shore up those areas of weakness, in particular with establishing good habits. And so the first area is evaluate your walls. Just right now, our tendency is, well, let me tell you about all the great things I'm doing. Okay, but really what we need to focus on right now is where are the areas of that wall around us that are weak, which need attention to be shored up and strengthened. Our mind goes to things like food. We talk about self-control, but there's a whole lot of areas in our life that self-control needs to be practiced. For example, our desires. Lust, Proverbs 25:28, a man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. The tongue, Proverbs 13, verse 8, whoever guards his mouth preserves his life, and whoever opens wide his lips comes to ruin. Temper. Proverbs 19:11, good sense makes one slow to anger. Time. Ephesians 5:15, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise but wise, making the best use of your time. Money. 1 Thessalonians 4:3, abstain from sexual immorality, that each one of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor. Remember, you might have really strong walls. You just have one area that they're torn down. Well, that's all that's needed. Enemy to come in, just one point of weakness. What areas are weak within you? A second thing to think about here is a point maybe to help us to establish some healthier habits is embrace dissatisfaction. Embrace it. Become dissatisfied with those areas that are weak in our life. Today, there is this common thinking in our culture, which is a culture of indulgence, of course. That this is just how you are. This is the way you're made. Embrace it. People that tell you that's negative, they're just shaming you. Don't listen to them. Just embrace who you are and what you are. And I understand that there's some value when it comes to some distinctiveness about personality. But God is never, right, okay with you indulging in areas of sinful behavior. The person who just says, well, it's just, I just go off on people sometimes. That's who I'm. No, that's not acceptable. I know some people might have a shorter temper than others, but yet it is not acceptable, right, to hurt people like that. Take responsibility and be dissatisfied. Even the great Paul writes in Philippians 3:12, not that I've already obtained all this or I'm already perfect. Brothers, I do not consider myself to have made it my own. But one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind me, straining toward what lies ahead. Even Paul says, I'm not perfect. I haven't arrived. There's areas of my life I still work on. I strive toward to strengthen. Right? Until the pain of staying the same is overridden by the pain of change, you're going to remain right where you are. You have to change the behavior. Right thinking doesn't change behavior. Right behavior changes behavior. You've got to act differently and develop the habits that follow. But as long as you just accept the way it is, guess what? That's the way it will be. I had a great aunt, on oxygen, her cigarette. Those allergies are going to kill me. Okay, maybe you have an allergy problem. But maybe there's something else going on here in the picture that's not helping the cause. Right? Probably those cigarettes and the oxygen tank are really going to be the end of you before anything else, maybe. But you have to come to terms with this is unacceptable. And I can lie to myself. I can lie to God. But it still is what it is. And it's unacceptable. Something must be done. And that leads us to the next. Take meaningful action. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Good intentions don't change anything. You must act differently. Paul says in 1 Timothy 4:7, train yourself for godliness. For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. If physical training, eating better and exercise and all things are of value, and they are of value. I mean, if you don't feel good physically, it's going to impact all kinds of areas right in your life. But how much more godliness of your spiritual life to be strengthened? I think, of course, just as Paul uses the athlete as an analogy to speak of other things, I think perhaps we can talk about some physical things to help us by thinking about how we develop spiritual habits. And so I'm going to offer a few ideas, practical, again, very specific ideas about in the area of developing good habits. The first one is start small. And I'm going to talk about this in a way that some of my own journey to try to be healthier. All right. So as a few years ago, I decided, no, I need to get to a healthier place than where I am. And so one area I thought, well, I'm going to start with tea. Now, I grew up drinking tea-flavored sugar. Right? I mean, that's honest. There's more sugar than tea. You can stand your spoon up in it, right? That's the way we drank it. So I got to start reducing this. Right? So, I mean, I go to these restaurants, and they dump a 5-pound bag of sugar in one of those drums. Like, what? They said, no wonder I like it. All right, so I just started weaning myself off, right? A little less, and a little less, and a little, and finally it reached really ridiculous proportions. And it hit me one day when I was driving through McDonald's, and I said, I want 7/8 tea, right? It's like, what? I mean, I said, okay, just a dash of sweet, right? You got to write a language that makes it just a dash, right? And they say, okay, whatever. So then Abe sticks his head out the window and says, I want 8/8 sweet tea, right? And that really threw the guy off. But I knew, finally, I had psychologically attached to that sugar to just end it all, right? Go straight unsweet. And, of course, the perfect kind of situation is now to taste sweet. It doesn't taste good to me. But I didn't just start all in, right? So small changes are significant. Secondly, have a plan. How you're going to do this. For me, again, just whenever I really need to drink a lot more water. That needs to be the next major step, right? But whenever I have a drink, I'm going to generally drink tea with whatever or water. And so have a plan and kind of how you're going to use that plan. Prepare for temptation is another one. So, I remember hearing a person talking to me about had sexual addictions. And he said, it's something always stuck with me over the years. He said, plan for moments of weakness during moments of strength. When you're strong, set boundaries in place. So, for example, back to the little food analogy. To walk up to an all-you-can-eat buffet and think, wow, I should now kind of develop a plan. That's probably not the best time, right? Better not to avoid the buffet altogether when you can. Just don't let yourself get in those situations. So plan ahead for the temptation. And then add more habits. Start small and then add a few more. So I looked at the tea and then I thought, well, maybe I'll try to eat, get rid of the waffles and syrup and other things that the big muffins that I generally eat a little healthier breakfast. Then it was like, I'm going to try to eat a salad for lunch. This was a real big step for me because we used to make fun of people that ate salads in my house. In fact, I recently gave my dad a T-shirt that said, it was a picture of a deer in a field, and the caption said, "My food does its business on your food." Okay, it might take a while for that to hit you, but just saying, we don't eat salad. We didn't call it salad. We call it rabbit food. We don't eat rabbit food in the Martin household. So this was a challenge, but trying to eat for lunch, a salad. So Wendy's makes good salads. Okay, I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna sit down, maybe read, eat a salad. That was a step. Then it was again trying to use some kind of portion control. The supper. I'm gonna eat whatever people are eating, but I'm gonna try to not hurt myself. And then adding to that, walking, always walking, trying to get 10,000 steps at least a day. So if you can walk, do it. So in the morning when I'm working on the sermon, I'm walking while I'm doing it, just up and moving. And then, of course, another step is about a reward. You need to reward yourself at times. That might be if it's about food, clothing, but something else, you have some kind of reward that you help to give yourself. Another step here is keeping the end in mind. There needs to be something more at stake, something bigger at hand. And maybe if it's health, for example, even that I don't want to be, I want to live long enough to enjoy my grandkids. I don't want to be a burden on my family. Maybe some bigger things, but in this context, we're talking about even bigger, more holistic changes. And even for me, it was more than about just what I was putting into my body food-wise, but also mentally. I watched a lot of garbage, right, and spending less time with that and more reading, and certainly biblical ideas, but also classics, and reading books that I just never would get to, but a larger encompassing of trying to become wiser, healthier, but also more close to God in my life. Tom Landry was the coach of the Dallas Cowboys for nearly 30 years. He said this. He said, a coach is someone who tells you what you don't want to hear, who has you see what you don't want to see, so that you can be what you know you've always wanted to be. Self-control and that self-discipline is that way of helping you to get to some better, giving up lesser things that you might claim greater things. You just have to remember what those greater things are and what you're working toward. Another one is just change your perception. A Stanford University study show that if you believe you have no willpower, guess what? You're not going to have any willpower. If you believe you do, you're going to have it. So change your belief. That you have a lot more control. You're not this victim, not someone enslaved. As much as just thinking rightly about these things that come at you. And maybe one great way to do that is take, for example, again, food, is fasting. I hear, there's people that I hear that tell me at times they get so busy and occupied they miss a meal. That has never happened in my life. I've never been so distracted I forgot to eat, right? That is the event. Everything else is just a side note to eating. But there's one thing about when you go for a period and you miss intentionally some meals, you realize these things aren't quite in control of you like you thought. Now, all right, young people, I'm going to get really personal now. What about other things in our life, like, say, electronics? You guys have been raised in a world where that's like food, right? And you might, like my dad would say after sometimes eating too much, I have self-control, I just choose not to use it, right? Well, you might say, well, this doesn't control me, and I could turn it away if I wanted, but try it. In fact, go for periods of time. And this isn't just about a young people issue. Us adults also, put these things away. Take a fast from some of these things and remind yourself they don't control you. That you're not dictated by these things. And a great way to do that is just by denying it altogether in a radical approach for a while. And of course, it's not just about what you're not doing. Fasting in Scripture is often attached to prayer and fasting. So then fill that time with prayer. Fill that time with study in the Scriptures, right? And reorient the universe with such an approach as that. And finally, and this is very important, forgive yourself when you blow it. If you don't, then the guilt and the shame that comes with it will send you spiraling right back into the addiction, right, the bondage. You're going to blow it. When you do, give it to God and let it go. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising up when we fail. I want to leave you with two prominent misunderstandings of how self-control in the worldly sense applies to the spiritual sense. First of all, is the false idea that self-control is self-powered. In the worldly view, it's just about having the willpower, the dominance, the right thinking, that you can overcome these things. But this is not really the spiritual lesson we learn here. The world is about individualism and, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And then that just ends up, when we fail, it fosters shame, disappointment, because you know what, you just failed. And then we turn right, you're right back to those, and it's a vicious cycle. We realize that, that God is in control. Remember, it is the fruit of the Spirit, not the fruit of your willpower, not the fruit of your intelligence, not the fruit of your, endurance. It is the fruit of the Spirit of God. And the Spirit of God, as he just said, is a gift. Now, it is important to remember that God can give you a gift. I can give you a gift. I give Eli a gift. Here you go. Here's your gift. But you've got to open the gift, right? Otherwise, it's of no value to you, even though I gave it to you. There's another thing about a misunderstanding about self-control. Self-control, in the world's perspective, is self-serving. Even when we talk about food, it's so I look better, that I feel better. Well, those are nothing wrong with that, but that has to have another step. These things always given by God are to the glory of God and in the service to others, to express love for God and love for others. So that has to be the end game, not you. As long as you are the focus of these things, it's going to fall short and shallow. So that gift God gives you is to be opened and then used, but used to serve others. If you think about the fruit of the Spirit, love, like joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness. I mean, these fruits of the Spirit are other-centered. They're how we relate to others. So even self-control is not self-serving, it is other-serving. Unless we understand that, then we miss out on that fruit of the Spirit. A year from now, Tokyo, Japan will host the Summer Olympics. I mean, like almost exactly a year from now. There'll be the opening games, ceremonies. And they just released, in fact, a couple days ago, the medals that are all made out of recycled electronics. Probably because the point is electronic pieces seem to, like, they just go on, so they made them, out of those parts. But even that, though, they're not going to last forever. And they will not carry from this world to the next, that medal. I mean, it's far superior than when Paul writing to the Corinthians, the Isthmian Games held in Corinth, they won the crown was celery. A crown of celery. Well, they didn't last a few days, and it was no good. But these medals will last a long time, but still, they're not eternal. And now we reach a really significant difference that Paul makes between the human athlete and the spiritual athlete. 1 Corinthians, back to our Bible, our opening reading, chapter 9, verse 25. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath. We, imperishable. This podium was designed, built by Albert Tate. The sound system put in here, the mic, the electronics, was done by Clark Mashburn. Two men who died last week are the two main parts of this podium. The podium will last a long time, but even it will not be eternal. But their service, their investment, they're willing to give and serve others, demonstrating their life, that will go with them. Amy and I just came back. When all this broke down, both of them, we were in British Columbia. And I mean, far. I mean, it took a plane, then you had to take a plane to land in the sea, in the around, because it was on an island. And so we were way out there, but we're riding bikes. It was almost like the same day some of these things were happening. We rode to a quarry. In the 1900s, many people came to British Columbia because they found a lot of money in digging up minerals. One particular family here came to this area there on Vancouver Island and made a fortune, right? And would build some castles, and family members building castles off some of the money they got from quarries like this. And they pretty well took out everything they could of value and then left the whole. The wife of one of those men, named Jenny, felt that was just unacceptable. So one day she went into that quarry, now abandoned. She took some dirt, and up on the left side of one of those walls, she went over and she planted a flower. Who would see it? Who would notice? She came back the next day. She planted another flower. 100 years later, people come from all over the world to see Butchered Garden. That's the exact shot, now what it looks like today. The point is that some of you may, I'm sure, think of your life more like the quarry than the garden. And you think, you don't know how many times I've tried. You don't know how many failures, the shame, the mistakes. I have no control. Whatever area of my life, the addictions or whatever it may be, I am just like a barren chasm. Okay. You don't get there overnight. It starts with just one moment, one pot, one flower, and then comes the next. You have to bring in soil from the outside, though. There's things you cannot do this yourself. You're going to have to bring good, rich soil from God's Word, from prayer, from the inspiration of other people. Study, all these things will help to bring in a rich soil, and then planting seeds, taking those seeds, and in time you will see things change. From death to life, from barrenness to beauty. But the first step of self-control is self-sacrifice. You must give your life fully to Christ to receive His Spirit. We can assist you with that or anything else. Come while we stand and sing. The eyes of my heart, Lord, open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you.